To discuss with senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Hans von Spakovsky. Great to see you tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming in. Okay, so I want to read a little bit of what the judge said in blocking DACA and some of the rulings that he's had with respect to this case and some pretrial motions. He said, campaign rhetoric so closely tied to the challenged executive action is admissible to show racial animus. He says the plaintiff's allegations raise a plausible inference that racial animus towards Mexicans and Latinos was a motivating factor in the decision to end DACA. This is the same thing we've seen with the travel ban, too. Right. Them going back to campaign statements and saying what he said then is the reason we're going to stop him from doing this now, even if the measure on its face, you could maybe argue was valid or neutral.
Yeah, and I think that shows how wrong the judge is. I mean, look, you can read his opinion, and it reads more like an extended op-ed than an actual legal decision. And the key thing here is that's just, I got to say it's bizarre, is that he's ruling that this president cannot revoke or change a policy implemented by a prior president. And that we've never, ever had a judge say that in our entire history. It's really bizarre is one word, nutty is another word.
Well, and what we have is one federal judge in a district court in San Francisco shutting down a nationwide policy, and there are now concerns being raised by this. Samuel Bray, who's a law professor at UCLA's law school, he says, how can a single judge decide a question for the whole country? Increasingly, legal scholars are concerned about the way national injunctions are transforming the relationship between the courts and the political branches, saying all you got to do is one judge, file with that one judge who disagrees with you, and you can shut down anything any administration tries to do.
Yeah, and so it's a race to the courthouse. I actually think this judge was ignoring prior Supreme Court precedent. There's a case from, I think, the 1970s called U.S. versus Mendoza, and it says that a federal court can't bind non-parties to a case. So this guy could issue an injunction with regard to the actual individuals who sued in the case, but he can't issue this broad injunction for all these people who aren't in the case. I mean, that's Supreme Court precedent, and the judge is ignoring it.
Well, and one of the things that conservatives are constantly worried about is activist judges and people who legislate and make these decisions from the bench. There's a lot of that going on in the Ninth Circuit, at least with respect to this president. So now we wait to see what the administration is going to do as far as filing legal challenges. But it's interesting because you noted something, that this judge has done something very unusual.
Yeah, look, something that's evidence of a political decision by a political judge is that when this case was first filed last fall, he issued an unprecedented order for broad discovery. He told the White House they had to turn over absolutely everything they had about the decision to end DACA. This was appealed by the government to the U.S. Supreme Court. They ruled 9-0 against this judge, but you know what he did? He filed his own brief with the U.S. Supreme Court. I have never heard of anything like that happening, and for a judge to file a brief arguing to a court, well, you should uphold my opinion, that's just not done, and it shows the bias of the judge.
It is very interesting. Okay, in the meantime, very quietly, the Immigration and Customs Service on their website posted this notice saying, due to a federal court order, USCIS has resumed accepting requests to renew a grant of deferred action under DACA. Now, that's not something the administration is going to want to broadcast loudly, especially because so many in their base are not for that. But now they've quietly said, well, until we get this figured out with this judge, for now, we're going to go ahead and start accepting these renewals for deferral again. That seems a little bit under the radar.
Well, yeah, I think they don't want a lot of notice about it, but they don't really have any choice until they do an emergency appeal of this judge's opinion. They're going to win. That is, the government's going to win.
Maybe not at the Ninth Circuit.
Maybe not the Ninth Circuit, but look, we've already gotten the Supreme Court ruling against this judge on one of his prior orders, and I think they're going to do it again.
All right. Well, in the meantime, those grants and the deferrals will continue, or at least the applications for them. Hans, great to see you tonight.
Thanks for having me.